My name is Keynote. I'm Social Director here at Center for Transformative Media, and I'm also a professor both in the School of Journalism and over at the College of Social Sciences and Humanities. And it's really my pleasure to introduce Lindsay Grace. So Lindsay is someone who's going to invite us to take play seriously, very seriously. None of you giggled. That was a joke. So we're going to try one more time. So Lindsay Grace is someone who's going to invite us to take play seriously, very seriously. There we go. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Anyways, Lindsay is the Knight Chair in Interactive Media at the University of Miami. He's an award-winning game designer, a leading voice on the power of play to drive social impact, and also he happens to be someone who's from around these parts, or at least New Bedford, which I did not know, but that he introduced to me because he was giving a talk at his junior high school alma mater down at Friends Academy in New Bedford. So this is a bit of a homecoming and why he said yes to leaving the beautiful, sunny and warm shores of Miami to come to Boston. Lindsay's career is focused on quite a few things, but has really focused on play not just being used for engagement, but for transformation. And it's tackled everything from misinformation and journalism to education and human-computer interaction. Today, he's going to share a little bit about how playful systems, and not just games, can help us imagine better futures, improve problem solving, and even reshape how we interact with technologies like generative AI. I'm going to make sure to keep us very, very strict on time, lest Adriana scolds me. I'm very, very afraid of Adriana. No, I'm kidding. But we're going to make sure that we stay on time. I'm going to invite Lindsay to come on up. At the conclusion of Lindsay's talk, I'm going to go ahead and throw it to the audience for Q&A, but I'm also somewhat intimidating, except I'll smile while I do it, so I'll just cut you off mid-question. Make sure all your questions are questions. I'm going to give this talk again. Make sure all your questions are questions. Lindsay, thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. This sounds like a great initiative. I'm really excited about the center. So I'm going to talk very quickly. These slides are going to go by very quickly. I can make them available later if they went too fast for you. So basically, I'm going to talk about games to improve education. I'm going to talk about games to improve and train AI systems and understand the world around us. I'm going to talk about games to train other AI systems in the medical field. And I'm going to talk about citizen science as well. And I'm going to really just kind of touch on a bunch of topics that relate to the way that we begin and play across medicine, politics, polling, and more. And I'm going to start with the absolute secret. There's going to be no secrets here. And the absolute secret to the success of any of these systems is play. And so play itself is a solution for when you need things like focus, when you need things like innovative thinking, when you need improved education, and when you need fresh solutions. And this is one of the things that I found over the years. So play helps us get perspective. If you're unfamiliar with this game, it's called It Takes Two. It's a game about divorce, or to imagine our actions as scaled, a little popular media here. This is a game from Sony called Shadow of the Colossus. To finding comfort in the smallest decisions. So there's a whole genre of games called comfy games. This particular one is called Unpacking, and of course you'd probably guess what it's about. And then there's play the play is actually often the work with which we want to engage, because play is labor. So this is Job Simulator, a decade-old game that people are still playing. But play is also, as many of us know, an effective motivator, and it's an opportunity to see ourselves in other ways. So putting ourselves in someone else's perspective, role play, etc. But play can also function as a means for envisioning a better future. And I would argue it's the way we want and can do things better and see possibility. So it's not merely about escaping from our present or past. Play itself is innate to human beings and human psychology. Play can be used to do things like excite people, practice solving problems, and keeping players engaged daily. But it can also be engaged at very large scale, and that's the power and propensity for it in the AI perspective. So it also allows us to do things like inspire empathy, which Bury Me My Love is a playable story about refugee couple. But it can also help us improve our habits, an old example from Disney about improving people's saving habits, or share other people's experience. So this is an old news game from the Singapore Straits, and also do things like simulate complex systems, practice real-world skills, and even ask critical questions. This is always one of my favorite social impact games. It's a game called Phone Story that shows you the horrors of the device you're using while you're playing the game, and reminds you of the sort of systems of slavery, the systems of environmental destruction that exist in cell phone manufacture and distribution. But it also helps you with things like fostering community, and inspiring global communities of play. Animal Crossing was extremely popular during the pandemic. Lots of my students were engaged through social systems through it. And also not only playing with each other, but playing to support each other. So this is an app on Steam called Kind Words, where it's really just about leaving kind notes to others and helping them feel good. But it's also a means, as much art may be, in playing to cope with loss, as in Gree, a game I'm still playing to this day. And one of the things that often comes up in this context is what's the difference between games and play? I've shown you a lot of games. I haven't helped you understand the value of play and their dichotomy. And one of the easiest ways to think about it is that all animals play. So the difference is in some ways that humans design games. And we design games often to help us understand how to play. While play is innate to lots of animals, the prescription of how to play something, the procedural rhetoric that bakes into that, is part of what makes games uniquely human. So you may ask at this point how I've come to this conclusion. So I've been making games for a long time. I started making them when I was 8 to 10 years old, back when, has anyone ever seen a floppy disk in this room? Okay, few. All right, cool. I've been studying and practicing game design for more than 20 years. I also ran 2 academic game studios. I directed 2 academic game studios with clients like these. Some of you may know some of those names. And I've been a solo game designer, developer, and artist. So I've been making my own games and releasing them on app stores, et cetera, for years. I've been an awarded game designer and received several career awards for this work, just so you get some perspective. And I also curate a variety of exhibitions over the years, the largest of which I co-curated with a variety of others, but basically accrued about 18,000 attendees over 2 days at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. This is one of, I think, our big successes in the game curating world. I've also written, at this point, just over 100 books, chapters, articles, and papers, either single author or co-author. And I think the most germane to this particular conversation in this presentation will be doing things with games, social impact through play. I'm going to show you some of the things that I tried to impart in that book. As mentioned, I've actually been teaching games for more than 20 years. I've taught at these 3 institutions primarily, although there's a 4th in there as well. And I either co-founded or took over leadership for many of these programs. And in addition to my perspective on games, just full disclosure, I am vice president of the Higher Education Video Game Alliance, which is sort of a educational lobby to support delivering high quality games education. And I've been vice president of the and a board member of the Global Game Jam nonprofit for years, which runs the largest sort of hackathon game jam in the world. And I myself have organized or co-organized about 10 game jams. And this is to kind of remind you how accessible games are. And we tend to focus on things like improving news. And I've worked with the US State Department and various embassies on trying to inspire people to make games about specific topics like health or misinformation. So this is one of the first times we did it in Malaysia. And then we scaled that to 75 participants across 10 countries in the ASEAN nations with some support from the US State Department. And I've done this sort of thing in India, and I've also juried and judged a variety of games competitions and helped start up with some co-organizers the Indicate Horizons event, which is sort of 20 universities looking at how they can improve games education and showcase their student work. And I've also curated the content for events like Games for Change. And this is really just to help you understand that I've created, supported, and observed many games and also game makers. So you get some context as to how I've kind of arrived at these conclusions. It's not just from my own work, but it's from observing others. And the core is, of course, why games? So the easiest way to think about it is that play itself is a kind of human superpower. And Lego kind of capitalized that on a few years ago, so I wanted to emphasize it again. It's humanity's superpower. And this is from a perspective basically emphasized through both anthropology, sociology, and psychology in particular. And these are the books I tend to cite just because I think they do a really good job of getting right to the heart of why play is valuable. And the way to understand play from those perspectives is to understand play as practice and laboratory. So as you see, this cat is practicing a life skill, which is hunting with this mouse. It's not just about the catnip, it's about practicing something that's actually valuable. And you'll see this in a lot of games. My quintessential example is always tag, because you're playing both hunter and hunted. But if you really think about it, and as illustrated by this AI-generated image, it's really good to practice running from a threat, like this boar, or running toward an opportunity, like food. And we see this, the chicken kicker from Fable, globally. We see this kind of play pervasive of a variety of cultures with very different values. And so play itself supports informal experimentation. It also helps with final solutions or finding solutions, practicing through play. But it also helps with things like role play to develop comfort and situational understanding. So as we try to perceive the world, play helps us perceive it in unique and interesting ways. Games have a clear sociocultural purpose that has existed well beyond and before digitalization of games. And so you can see these sorts of histories. So Snakes and Ladders is really about virtue and vice from Indian culture. And then you have the Landlord's Game, which is sort of one of our best examples of pervasive, long-running economic model of demonstrating the problem with Georgist economies. So, or Georgist economics, and why there are problems in the ways that we own and distribute land. And this was created way back in 1904. So one of the things that helps people understand this is thinking about whether or not it's a play or game, or rather it's play or games. And so I encourage people to think of games as structured play. Designers themselves create the problems, and designers create the solutions. So they tell us how to solve a problem. And one of the things we see is that basically you can understand gameplay as designers writing problems and players reading those problems. So designing and play, or game and play design are really just opportunities to solve problems over and over again. And games themselves are structured play to practice, experiment, and understand because they employ play. So when I ask, sort of like when people ask why make a game over other media, one of the things I try to remind them is that readers read, audiences watch, and players do. And it's that doing that really compels people. So what you're trying to do is get people to be interested in what they do in the game, which is why often new players ask, what do I do in this game? And games themselves require active engagement, as illustrated by AAA products like Discovery Tour, Assassin's Creed, where you get to tour ancient Egypt. The idea is that you're learning through play, you're learning by doing. And you can see this over and over again, whether or not it's practicing care for the environment, or practicing better dental care, or empathizing with unhoused people. All of these examples give you a sense for that, as do games that are more than simulation. The idea is that games themselves engage the state of play. And so the state of play is kind of an opportunity for active learning. And the way it works, basically, if you've ever seen a flow diagram before, this might be really familiar from Csikszentmihalyi, but the idea is that we're trying to get people balanced between anxiety and boredom. You've taken a game sometimes, picked it up and go, that's just too much, I'm putting the controller down. At other times, you said, I don't really care. And so in the classroom, the equivalent of this is the students who are so bored they're falling asleep, or the students are so anxious they're overwhelmed. What we're trying to do is get them in that happy spot between. And that flow state, as positive psychology describes it, is also quite applicable to games. And so today, I'm going to kind of give you 3 core concepts for play that I think will help you understand how they intersect with the topics that the center is looking at. So first is play as interface. I gave this keynote for Kai Play several years ago. Essentially, I've been encouraging people to solve problems differently. And I've been doing this by helping people design new problem solution pairs. Remember, we talked about game design as problems and solutions. And so I've been encouraging avoiding the same analogies, these sort of like, let's get rid of the desktop metaphor, let's get beyond sticky notes and trash cans, to something that was less about the nouns and trying to categorize nouns and more about the verbs, the activities we do. And so if we thought more about what we often call in games, game verbs, we might actually make more engaging interfaces. So if we move beyond the click to something more interesting, perhaps it's some version of a spinner, something more engaging like a ball, which has a lot of complexity to it, or something more satisfying like these little frogs that you tap the back of them and they hop. Often playful GUIs tapping into graphical user interfaces tap into characteristics of human psychology and culture. So our experience with the real world helps inform these kinds of playful experiences. So we know, for example, from psychology that people are drawn to motion. You just kept watching that thing change because you're keyed to motion, or that we learn concepts through play. So we have these sorts of things we did as children that are still resound in our adulthood. or that play itself is just generally employable. It's an opportunity to tap into our instincts to experiment, to do what not only play inspires and affords, but to experiment with a space, to build our sandcastles, to explore and understand the materiality of data, or to build something new. And so play as interface is really an opportunity to find new solutions. It engages play as an actual state of human psychology, and it employs that for the opportunities to practice and experiment less prescriptively than sort of a classical graphical user interface would. So play itself helps us see the mundane as something real. So this rail is actually a good example of that. It's now a plaything, not just something to hold while going down the stairs, or willingness to accept challenges because we are being playful, or to cooperate with each other, as you'll see in a lot of citizen science work, or to persist when things are hard, which you need for sort of that sense of rigor and perseverance, or to remain engaged in a play state, or to remain engaging, to be playful through, or engaging through play. And so one of the super simple examples is the variability in swiping is sort of moving in that direction on a spectrum. So tapping becomes swiping because swiping is slightly playful, more playful verb. Years ago, 11 years ago, we created this interface that tried to articulate Edgar Allan Poe's Telltale Heart without any language, but only action. And so we used a bunch of verbs on an accelerometer to give people that sense. And that translated years later to a much more simple interface that helped with our interest in misinformation and disinformation. So back in 2017 with Maggie Farley and Bob Hone and a team of other folks when I was running the American University Game Center, we produced this really simple game called Factitious. And its first round was very unplayful. Its second round used swiping to make it playful. And it was really quite simple. We basically stole a page from Tinder and said, you're going to swipe right if you think it's real, you're going to swipe left if you think it's fake, and we're going to let you play this poll. And in the time that we released it, we got over 1 million plays in a very short amount of time. 50,000 of those people actually gave us their demographic information. It's self-report information, but it ends up being a poll that allows us to perceive people's understanding of particular problems. So we're able to, in a Chi paper we published, demonstrate the performance for our 50,000 players declined at age 60, or that the older you are, the longer you take. But we also found things like there was a relationship between reported education, all kinds of data that we were able to collect very easily. And it all comes from playful swiping, which is why one of the things that I've been sort of pushing in the world of sort of like simple HCI is just looking at more playful polling to keep people engaged and interested. But games can also train people. They can go the other way. Instead of training AI and data sets, we can go the other way and think about how they might train people and AI. And so on the AI side, I think many of you may know the early image tagging app called Peekaboom, which later informed Google Images. And this was really just a sort of semi-playful experience that was about doing more perception than an average algorithm could do. And what's fun about this is that one of the things I've noticed is in AI, if you look at all the challenges and all the foci within AI, perception is most easily improved through games and play. And so you've got things like Eye in the Sky, which is literal tower defense mechanic applied to identifying macular degeneration in images, which is really neat, citizen science kind of work. And then you've got things like Malaria Spot, which does the same basic thing. So they had 150,000 people contribute to diagnosing malaria from blood cell images. But the big idea is really just play for AI. So one of the things I think is quite probable is that play itself could be the future of work in training AI systems. So actually play games instead of sort of review data all the time. The reviewing will happen through play because we're highly focused. So games are often used to encourage and optimize our analysis skills, the kind of focus we offer in something like chess, but they're also used to scrutinize more deeply, as well as doing some real world problem solving. And so I have a paper you guys can look up where we actually talk about, particularly in the mis and disinformation space, but generally that there's this triad that I think is quite useful to people, which involves emotion, empathy, and exposure, three common communication sciences concepts around helping people basically become inoculated from communication threats. And I think this might be useful to some of you, completely free and available online. So core concept 2 is play as civil disobedience. So this is basically the idea that play can serve as rebellion and is quite effective as rebellion. So It can be a response to culture. And I did this sort of work in the digital space for years. I had this art practice called Big Huggin', where I was critiquing the way we play to offer another. So in this case, you hug this bear in order to get past your obstacles. It's sort of a playful way to say, why does everything have to be so hard and plasticky? Can it be warm and cuddly? And I have another game that Games for Change put in their Hall of Fame a long time ago that was basically about stopping to smell the flowers. So the more you move, the more the world disappears, and the longer you stay, the more the world reveals itself. But if you wait too long, the world starts to disappear again. So you're constantly engaging that balance. And I've also done games about undoing historical atrocity. This game is about the Nanjing Massacre called Healer, and a variety of others. But designing is not the only way to counter existing systems. And so I've done some work that I think is really valuable in the context of countercultures and play it at the edge of society. And 3 great case studies in the analog world and understanding urban spaces would be parkour, skywalking, basically climbing a high building and then taking great photos of yourself, and skateboarding. And I think of these as 3 ways to play that engage ordinary spaces, often in ways they were not intended. If you know the history of skateboarding, you know that it was really about skateboarding through suburban LA and empty swimming pools. And so the idea that there are signs and all kinds of restrictions around the kinds of activities you can do in an urban space, there's an opportunity to understand these as the way that people engage, particularly because they tend to be popular with teens, at rebelling at that edge of childhood and adulthood. And they're definitely political play. So parkour players are often arrested for the work that they do or the play that they do. And it's often about subverting authority as a kind of byproduct of you just playing. I'm using this space in a way you didn't intend, deal with it. And the highlights that are kind of neat here is that it is transgressive play. It wasn't set up as a play space, but it is a play space. And then sometimes it has very high consequences for the player and ceases to be play, as in this particular situation. But it's also something you can do in the digital spaces. So there's a kind of civil disobedience to this kind of play. It's doing things like a flash mob dance party in Fortnite when not expected, or photographing instead of fighting in Call of Duty, as one artist has done. But basically that play itself can serve as a performance of civil disobedience in much the way that artists like Yoko Ono in Play It by Trust did way back in the 60s. So core concept 3, as I wrap up, is basically to remind you of the mass media impact that games have. So with more than 3 billion game players worldwide and esports and other large-scale opportunities, the fact that chess.com players are actually like exponentially increased in the last couple of years, there's an interest in watching gameplay and engaging in gameplay. And it's obviously we have histories. So this was an esports event where someone is basically protesting the situation in Hong Kong, but you'll see that there's sort of opportunities for large-scale impact. And so one of the cores that I've used in a lot of my work in the last decade or so is that we spend so much time jumping through hoops. This is one of the notoriously worst games ever, Superman 64. Superman just jumps through hoops, which isn't that interesting for Superman, to flying birds, right? We're just fleeing birds over spaces and dodging fictional obstacles. I've been arguing for at least 15 years at this point that we need to stop solving problems that are little imagined problems in games and actually give people real world problems so they can practice those big problems and solve them. And so big computational problems, I think one of the best examples of this is Fold It, which has gotten a lot of press, particularly back in sort of the early mid 2000s. But we also have examples in medical compliance or remissions, a good sort of assessed intervention for medical compliance, or helping map the human brain, as this particular GWAP Games with a Purpose did, or just addressing sort of big data challenges through gameplay itself. One of the examples we showed at Games for Change a couple of years ago was Borderlands Science. Another example is Sea Hero Quest, and then of course Fold It, as I mentioned. But one of the things that's neat about, say, Borderlands 3 is you've taken an audience that didn't come here to do citizen science and asked them basically to play this as a way of sort of mapping DNA strands. So you've grabbed that energy and said, just put it here so we can do some good social impact with it as well. And I've done this kind of work with like the National Cancer Institute, where we're trying to help people understand the opportunities between data analysis and games. And then there's some other good examples. I think the work that the State Department did around Harmony Square is a good example on helping people understand mis and disinformation. BBC, who got a lot of flack for creating Syrian Journey, is another example of that. But at the end, I think we always realize that play is about work. It's just a different kind of work. It's a work that we're interested in doing. And it's working optimally. That's where the focus comes from. And we can use it as anything, including assessments, which I'll give you the last sort of snapshot of the things that I was doing with ETS, or we were doing with ETS back when I was in DC. So one of the big problems on a scale issue with certain types of assessments is they need to be one-on-one interviews. This is particularly true in what we call sociopragmatics, understanding if someone knows the right thing to say at the right context. And so ETS is looking for a solution that would avoid having to worry about all the cognitive biases that occur on one-to-one interviews. So we created this thing called Awkward Annie, and really it's just designed to assess sociopragmatics and substitute, but it can scale. We could have 1,000 people play this over 20 minutes and get a better reading than we could on a one-to-one interview. And so we've been doing this sort of work, relatively spotty examples. There aren't like a lot of cohesive examples, but the opportunity is there. So we can ideally convert the work of testing into play so that we can run farther, practice skills, and we can do things like improve art. We can actually play to improve instead of practice to improve. We often emphasize practice as something that is labor intensive, and play doesn't seem labor intensive, although it's a tremendous amount of labor. But play is only valuable if it improves outcomes. That's something I really try to do. Because it is a safe space, it allows players to learn from their mistakes. It is outside the real world. We don't want people playing with real data and then changing the world instantly. We want to see their results until we can optimize it. So we can actually work to solve some of the biggest social and educational problems through play. We can do things like embrace ambiguity, and explore things that are a little tougher, that require the heuristics of human behavior. You have 20, 30 years of experience if you're 30 years old, and while a computer can do that very quickly, your nuance is what's really interesting. And we can use games and play to ask more of ourselves, to explore better ways to work together, to explore, as the UN has done, topics that are really hard and need sort of cohesive agreement. But we can also find better ways to improve the world, to balance our responsibilities to nature. Terra Nil is a good example of a game that sort of, oh, we've already ruined the world. How do we re-green it? How do we fix the world? And then there are others. But basically, I wanted to kind of conclude with games and play are not a technology that will solve problems. They're really a state that will help solve some problems. It's not going to be the panacea for everything. And that play itself is an innate psychological state. So when I'm encouraging people to design playful things, I'm trying to get them to engage their brains in play, and that it's distinctly part of healthy human state. So Stuart Brown did a lot of work at the NIH for many years and basically discovered if you don't play, something's wrong. And so people often go, and I'm sure you've probably heard this from other play theorists, what's the opposite of play? Any guess? Most people go work. Truth is, depression, and like psych has proven this. And so what Sutton Smith is often cited as the person behind this, but it's been proven in other domains. And so I think it's important to recognize that when we don't play, we have problems. When educators stop being playful, you lose this. They stop being sort of good educators because they're also not creating that safe space that a game might create where it says fail 7 times until you learn. And so education, like science, should be about exploring and experimenting. And so instead of offering people to get to work, I like to offer people to get to play, because we know that play functions as practice, experimentation, and there's much more we can do with play than we're doing now. It's like this untapped mental state that we're very hesitant to use because of social restrictions, but ultimately playing with ideas is really healthy. So play is an opportunity to understand the next generation of problems. Basically, we know these are going to be related to AI prompts, but also interpreting more complicated issues. So it's that third order. AI will get us to generative AI will go to a certain point, and then we'll need play to clean that up. So as a society, as we level up, as the water rises below, and as play and education are augmented by social emotional learning robots and other cool technologies, complex problems actually need the nuances of human logic, where our ability to analyze extends beyond the rote, beyond the calculable instances of chess, one of the first sort of AI applications in games for AI, toward the imperfect information games of life, which require the heuristics you've earned in living, and toward the experience of heuristic-driven innovations that inspire us to do things we had never dreamed before, like going further, working better, and engaging people on new terms, so at much larger scales. So I strongly encourage you to employ and embrace play, and I think that brings me right to the end.
I'll have you keep the microphone while I turn this one on. And if there are any questions, just raise your hand and I'll drift right towards you.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was a fantastic presentation. Two quick questions. So one, we have like a big cultural critique, I think, in Severance, the series on Apple TV, of the gamification of work, macro data refinement. I'm curious what your views are on that. And then in second, totally unrelated question, how do you see all of this playing out, like as augmented reality and other locative media technologies sort of spill the game board out into the city and the real world?
So I'll answer the second question first, because I've said lots about it before publicly and in the news. And the short version is, I think the huge opportunity is an augmented reality. I think one of the things we fail to recognize is that we've already augmented our reality. I don't know where to go to dinner without checking TripAdvisor or whatever product first. So I'm perceiving the world differently. Navigation tells me where to go and what to ignore. This is the best exit. I don't worry about the other exits. So I think we're already augmenting reality, but I think the opportunity in games is in helping us to perceive it differently. So for example, maybe it's, I want a road trip, but I only want to stop at a distinct burger in every state. That's a playful way to perceive your navigation that's not just about the shortest, most optimized path. And I think that actually helps us engage with spaces differently. So I think it's just off the top of my head, an easy example. On the other side, I think that thinking about your innie and outie is an obvious sort of analogy to sort of your play state and your non-play state. I think the dichotomy is part of the problem, though. I don't think we should have sharp contrast like that, because I think that one of the things that makes something a grind, even in games, is when you feel that it's transitioned from the play state to work state. I'm just over here killing boars so I can get more gold, so I can get to the point where I get to play again. And I think that I love the show, and it's not a negative critique of the show, but I think that there is more clever way to, and I think this ties to your second question, to augment our space instead of separate our space. It feels like a very Western, very sort of like work is the only thing that matters perspective to say they must be a sharp contrast between the two. Sitting from the luxury of tenure and yeah, being realistic.
The next question right back there.
Great, Celia.
Hey, Lindsay, it's so great to have you here. What a fantastic talk. I was just like, oh, the whole time. It was wonderful. So I don't know if you remember this, but one of the first few years of Games for Change, we had a town hall meeting, and everyone was talking about how game designers are smart enough to save the world and solve all the world's problems. And I stood up in the audience and I said, if that were true, why haven't they done it yet? And now we're at this really interesting point where, like, things have been gotten progressively worse since then. And game designers, at least at the larger level, I think a lot of indie game designers, as you showed today, which I want to emphasize, many of the games you showed were indie games, have done this. But the mainstream game industry has just basically turned their back on applying their skills to real world problems. Just wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
So I was at GDC last week, and it feels, particularly with all the shifts, it feels particularly apparent. But it was interesting because the most politically engaged experience I had at Game Developers Conference, annual conference with all the games folks sort of globally, is in the Independent Games Festival, which was very clearly sort of like, no, we have the power to engage because our media is an engaging media, to start reminding people of the things that are deteriorating around them. And so I think there's something about the independent game spirit that is part of why that happens. It tends to be similar to the artistic spirit. It tends to be similar to the creative spirits. And I think what happens is, particularly, no offense to the industry, but as we move toward a factory model where 300 people need to produce a game that makes sure it has the absolute most sort of interest across a variety of passions, I think we do bland out some of the pro-social end of it. I think we are fine to distract because that's what we think most people want. But I'll stop there before I get myself in trouble. But I have some other thoughts today. Yeah.
We have a question over here, and probably the second to last question, just for the purposes of keeping us on time.
Hey, hi. Thanks for a great talk. Maybe this is kind of like the prior question, but I'm thinking about, like, okay, the kitten catching the thing is learning how to kill.
Yep.
And a kid playing certain kinds of games, drone racing, is learning how to do warfare today. So what about games for bad?
So there are, and I think the truth is that there are some bad necessities, right? A kitten may need to hunt. And so I think the reality is we have to accept both. And I think what we've done is we've funded a lot of the bad. And one of my favorite examples, hey, we're in Boston. One of the things I sometimes talk about is that in my sort of intro level courses is one of the first video games to sort of ever become popular is a game called Space War. It's part of the sort of initial history, depending on whether or not you count that or Higginbotham's Pong. And the short version is it was played on shared computing resources at MIT by people who should have been designing simulations for missiles and combat. And they're like, no, I'd rather be here. I do think humanity, healthy humanity is about not doing the bad things. But I do think, and I've written about this, you can find it at professorgrace.com. I think one of the problems is we go into everything optimistically, as we are with AI right now, and we don't see the bad side. I can give you a great concrete example. When I was a software architect, I remember being really excited about Visual Basic Script, and Microsoft made it really simple. And it was like, this is a powerful tool. And within minutes, I was making a virus because it was sort of like, oh, I wonder how I could break this. But that's the playful side of us. By identifying how we can break things, we can actually repair them.
One more question all the way down there. If you can help me get there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your talk. So I was just curious about how you've seen narratives of play change over time, because I know when I was a kid, at least, my mother would only let me play educational games or quote unquote educational games. So things like Civilization, SimCity, Age of Empires. And I know, as the last question kind of got to, there's a certain violence to even those games, but certainly they weren't Call of Duty at the same time. So I was just curious how you've seen that narrative shift. And
as the cost of producing games lowers, one of the things that was really excited about independent games is that we saw many more narratives and many alternative narratives. And this is sort of like late 2000s, 2010s. And I think that's one of the big innovations. But the other big innovation is how much people are augmenting the narrative structure or narrative assumptions through AI. I think a good conference for you to check out is iKids. It's the interactive, I always get this wrong, but ICIDS. One of my colleagues, Hart McCunitz, has always been involved in these sort of like how we deal with digital narratives or IDN in new and interesting ways. I think that would be a great resource for you. I've spoken there a couple of times. I think they've got a good pulse on the academic development in that space. I think that was our last question, or?
I think there's one right there. We have about just last question, if you can make it a real quick one. Sorry
Thank you so much. Yeah, this was a great talk. It was really helpful. And my question is, as an XR designer at KMD, how do you think you can make games for social change or bigger problems, as you mentioned, instead of a fictional problem? How do you make them more inviting for people to actually play?
Give them things they want to do or they're interested in doing. You have to give them interesting problem solution pairs, which is literally like most of my book, first book. And I think that's the most compelling. We think often in narrative form and we think, I'm going to tell a problem and I'm going to give them a role and they're going to play this role. But I actually think it's about what you have them do. And you can find, I've given this talk before, and I think I actually gave it at Games for Change in Micro Talk years ago. I made a game with that intention and it was absolute junk. And it was because I made the wrong assumptions. It was called Third World Shooter or Third World. Yeah, I think it was Third World Shooter. And I didn't have any interesting verbs. The verbs were things like go get people to sign a petition. And I don't want to do that in the real world. So I'm pretty sure I'm not really eager to do it in the virtual world. And it's those game verbs, those things that we're offering that really compel people to say, I'm interested in it. Instead of the backstory or the situation or how beautiful the graphics are, it's really about, wait, what am I solving? What am I doing? So the problem solution pair, I think, is a big one, in my humble opinion. Cool.
So there we go. So why don't we give Lindsay a really thunderous round of applause. Thanks so much. And Lindsay and I are going to get out of the way in between lunch and you. But before that, we're going to throw it back to Adriana. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Caleb. Yeah, lunch is ready. But before that, I just wanted to remind you that talking about designing AR games, that our AR game is on. So there's a brochure inside your folder that explains how to play the game. You have to download an app called Hoverlay and then get the clues that are inside the game right here. And then the first one who finishes and gives it to the front desk is going to win the game and watch. And you're going to have an hour to play. So you can have to choose between eating your food or winning the game and watch. And we'll come back here at 1:30 for the next panel. Thank you.